So the information we're going to cover kind of expands on Chapter 8 in the PDF book. And if you wanted more on that, I also have a link here to the actual PHP website. So we've got 3 different types of arrays that we're going to talk about. And in your assignment, you will be working with all 3 types. Yes, and I know arrays are everybody's favorites. I was going to say, to me, arrays are not difficult, but a lot of people have trouble with them. Yeah, I mean, they're in every language. So what's a little different about PHP is it's just kind of like JavaScript. The array is loosely typed. Okay, so that's what you have to remember about PHP, which means that it's not just a text array or a number array. You can put different data types into the array. This first example happens to be food, different types of food, and so it's text. But I could have put numbers in there if I wanted to. When you create an array, you can initialize it, like this first example, or you can actually assign index numbers to values. So there's 2 different ways to do it. What would I do? I'd probably do the first method just because it's faster and easier. Okay. I was going to say, okay, Tanner, mute. Tanner, you got to mute yourself. So regardless of how the array is created, in order to get to the values, you have to subscript it. So this little example creates an array, and then we're subscripting in. Position 0 is going to grab Italian. Position 3 is going to grab Chinese. So it's going to display back, I like Italian and Chinese food. Okay, and what I usually do when I work with arrays is I kind of visualize how they look, because I think it's easier, especially when you're starting to understand it. So it's like a little table. And so these are the subscripts. And then this is the data that's stored. So I mentioned one of the big differences in PHP versus traditional programming is you can have multiple data types, okay, because it's a loosely typed language. Another difference, you can only store 100,000 elements, okay? That's it, only 100,000, okay? PHP arrays can expand and shrink after they are created, similar to JavaScript. Okay, with the JavaScript array or PHP, you can add on to it. If you remove from it, you're making it smaller. Okay, so it's dynamic. Traditional programming, you can't do that. Once you say what the size is, that is the size. Okay. A lot of languages, to figure out how many elements are in the array, you use a length property. But in PHP, what you have to use is a count function. Okay, so it's just count, and then you're passing it the name of the array, and it retrieves how many elements are stored. Okay, so here's our same example, and then we're just displaying the food array contains. It's going to count the elements, and so even though it starts at subscript 0, there are 4 elements in there. Okay, so it's going to retrieve 4 types of food. Now, if you want to print out the array and the subscript, okay, which is helpful, especially if you're debugging, there is a command that will do that. It's print_r. Okay, so if you do print_r and then give it the name of the array, how it looks when it prints is it tells you it's an array, and then it's got subscript 0, and then it's showing you Kermit the Frog is in I do not use serious examples, in case you guys didn't notice. Okay? So Kermit the Frog is in subscript 0. Subscript 1 has Tigger. Subscript 2 has Mickey Mouse. Subscript 3 has Miss Piggy. Okay? So this is exactly what it's going to look like when it prints, which when you're first working with arrays, that's kind of helpful. So you can see what's stored at the different elements. When you loop through an array, personally, I think it's easier to use either a for loop or for each. And that's just because you can use count to figure out how many elements are in there. So it makes using a for loop pretty easy. So once you have the array, if you wanted to display what's in it, you've got a variable that's going to be your subscript. In this case, I'm just calling it X. The condition you're checking is that X is less than the count. And then each time you go through the loop, it's going to add 1 to X. Okay, so it's going to subscript in at position 0 and display Italian. And then you'll notice there's a little break here, so it does a line break. And then it adds 1. So it subscripts in and it grabs Mexican. We get a line break, adds 1 to it. Subscripts in, grabs American, does a line break, etc. And then once we have passed 4, right? So once we get to 5, well, 5 isn't less than 4, so it breaks out of the loop. So for loop is a great way to access the data. You can also use a list function. And what the list function does is it lets you assign variable names to the items that are in the array. Okay? And then it's just a matter of using the variable names, so you don't have to subscript in. Okay? So in this little example, we still have our famous actors, Kermit, Tigger, Mickey Mouse, Miss Piggy. Okay? And then we have variables in a list, and we set that equal to the actor array. Okay? And then we can just use those variables instead of subscripting in. So if you want to know more about lists, this is basically how you set it up. But if you were curious, I do have a link to it so you can kind of explore more about it. Do you guys have any questions about indexed arrays? Okay, these are the kind that I think you guys are most used to working with. In PHP, associative arrays are used everywhere. In fact, when you fill out a form and you submit it, all of the form data goes into an associative array. Okay, it's either going to be the get global or the post global. Okay, so you are going to be using associative arrays throughout the course, and we've actually already used some. Okay, yeah. So associative arrays are pretty important. So how they work is instead of using a subscript, you're actually using a named key to access the data. Okay, so you're giving the key a name. And in this little example, I have employees. You can see I've got a little string here with the employee number. That is the key. And then I've got the little arrow. Okay, and that is referencing this value. And then I've got this employee number, which is a key, and that is referencing this value. Okay, so you have keys, and then you have values that you're storing. Okay, so this is one way to do it. The other way to do it is not the method that I would use, but it's very similar to what we saw with the indexed arrays. So you actually have the brackets, and then inside the brackets, you put whatever your key is, set that equal to the value. So I guess if you guys don't like doing the little arrow here, you could use method 2. Either method is okay. Okay, it's just, I would use method 1 because it's a little less typing. Okay, and if you're going to visualize the array, this is how it would look. You've got the key and the value. So to access these values, you have to subscript in with the key. Okay, so here's an example, employee number 123987 makes, and then we're subscripting into employees with 123987. So that's 40,000 per year. Okay, and so here it is in the full-blown, very short program. And as far as looping through, you can't really do a for loop with a subscript, right? Because we're using keys. So what you can use is a for each. A for each is going to access every single element. And you can see we've got the name of the array here as the first value, the value on the left of the arrow, that is your key. So you could call it key, you can call it X, you can call it whatever you want, okay? And then we've got the arrow, and whatever variable you put on the right is the value. So if it makes more sense to you guys to do $key, arrow, $value, that's perfectly fine. Okay, if you want to shorten it and just do a $K, $V, you can. Or you can do what I did. Okay, so it's kind of the positioning here that determines the key and the value. So for a for each, you're telling it the array, you're assigning a variable for the key, you're assigning a variable for the value, and then you just pretty much print out the key and the value. And it is a for each loop, so it's going to access every single key value pair, because that is what for each does. Does that make sense? So here is another little example. So I've got a little superhero here, Bob. Bob the superhero, age 30, special power is X-ray vision. Yes, I do these late at night, so yeah. So here's a little for each loop for Bob. So the character is the array, and it's kind of set up the same way. So it's basically going to print out the key followed by the value. So the key here is name, occupation, superhero, special power. So you can see the key printing out and then the value. You guys have any questions? I was going to say, we're going to use these associative arrays a lot because when we get into forms, whatever you put in for the name attribute becomes the key. And then what you enter into the form becomes the value. So we use it a lot. Multi-dimensional arrays. So these are an array, and within the array, you have additional arrays. So it's an array of arrays. So basically, you're going to have an associative array inside one array element, and it ends up creating a multi-column table. Okay. So the code to create that kind of table is you still do an array name. You set it equal to an array, and you'll notice there's a parenthesis here and down here with a semicolon. And then inside, we have multiple arrays. So that is how you set it up. Okay, so here is the employee array. Okay, and you can see that we've got the employee number, we've got the name, and we got the salary. And then in between, we have commas. Okay, so you can kind of see how that looks here. So we end up with a 3-column table. Okay, so here's the array. Now, how do we, so you can see how to set it up. So how do we access everything? There's a couple different ways you can do it. Okay, you can set a row variable. And so we know there's 4 rows. So as long as row is less than 4, because the first one is 0. 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so as long as row is less than 4, we can access the data. And then you can see that we're subscripting in with the row that's going to change. And then our first column is 0. Our second column is 1. And our third column is 2. So how this works, for the first one, this is row 0, column 0. Row 0, column 1. Row 0, column 2. Okay? And then once it prints that information, then we go to row 1. Row 1, column 0. Row 1, column 1. Row 1, column 2. Does that make sense? So how we're accessing here is we've got the columns hard-coded and the row number is going to change. With a multidimensional array, you're pretty much going to have to do some kind of loop. Okay? And then this is what the output looks like. Now you might be wondering, can I do a for each loop? Yes, you can. Okay, so if you prefer to do a for each, what does that save you? Well, you don't have to worry about subscripting and really incrementing the subscript, okay? Because it's automatically going to process every single row. So here we got a for each, and employees is our array. And then we've got a variable for the key, and we got a variable for the value. Okay, and so here we've got our key, and then we are subscripting in for the column. Okay, because this is going to give us the 0, 0, 0 for the first one, then it's going to be 1, 1, 1, then it'll be 2, 2, 2, etc. Okay, to me, this is more confusing than this. But when you guys are doing your assignment, you can do it either way. Okay, that's why I'm showing you multiple ways. You do whatever makes the most sense to you. So this last method is the most flexible because there is no hard coding of columns or rows. So we have an outer loop, which is going to go by row. And then we have an inner loop, which is going to go by column. Okay, so basically it's going to start with row 0, and then we hit the inner loop. Okay, and so with the inner loop, you'll notice that it's going to start on column 0, then it'll go to column 1, column 2. Column 2 happens to be the end. So when it hits column 2, we get a line break, and then we get a horizontal rule. So it does the line break, puts the lovely little line in here. Okay, and then it goes back up and increases the row. So looking at our example, so outer loop is row, so it starts at 0, which is this row. Okay, then the inner loop is column. So column starts at 0, which is this. Then column goes to 1, which is this. Column goes to 2, which is this. And then it hits the if statement. Okay, it does the line break, does the horizontal rule. Okay, so now it's done processing. So then it goes back to row, increases row by 1, and then it starts all over with column. So column is at 0, column goes to 1, column goes to 2. Okay, then it does the line break, the horizontal rule, goes back to the row loop, increases 1. So now we're here. And then it whips through those columns again. Okay, so it is by far the most flexible, okay, but it can be a little bit confusing because you have a loop inside of a loop. Okay, what method would I personally use? I would do the flexible method. Okay, to me, because I've worked with it enough, it makes sense. Okay, if you think that multidimensional arrays are a little confusing, and a lot of people do, okay, especially if you haven't worked with them very much, then I would suggest maybe using this first method, which is a little easier to understand. So as if there weren't enough ways to access, there is another way that I'm going to show you. Because we can just not have enough ways to access data. So this combines a for each with a while and a list. So we've still got the same employee array, okay? And then the for each is going to access each of the rows. We're going to be using the while and the list to access the different elements. And so basically what it does, the list has got a key and a value, but the key ends up being like an index. So it goes in, this is our first one to process, with a 0. You can see I printed out the key and the value, so it goes in with a 0, and it accesses the number, okay? And then it goes in with a 1, and it accesses the name. Then it goes in with a 2, accesses the number, okay? Then we do a line break, we get the horizontal rule, and it processes the next row, okay? So that's how it is processing. You guys have any questions? So array functions. Array functions will make your life easier. Because, yes, because if you want to, delete the last element off the array, or add an element onto the end, or if you want to sort in ascending order or descending order, there are functions that will do this for you. Okay? And they're very easy to use. So what I've done is I've included a link to 3 schools so you can actually practice. And then I've also included a link to the PHP manual. So if you want more information, you can get it. But it's pretty self-explanatory, right? So pop deletes the last element and push adds. So if we take a look at this. Okay, so here we've got a red, green, and blue array, and then it's going to pop the last element off and print it. So we would expect red and green. So instead of array, we want to add using push. And what we want to add is just, and let's run. Whoop, does not like how I did that. Array push. Yeah, we'll come back over here and take a look at push. Oh, okay, I see what I did. It wants this first. All right, we'll try that again. Oh, because that's the name of the array. Okay, there it is. All right, so array name, whatever you're gonna add. Okay, and if we wanted more than one, we should be able to add multiples on here. What color do you guys like? Purple? Okay, and so that's pretty much how those two work. If we wanted to sort it, we should be able to just do sort and then the name of the array. Oops, we better print again. Oh, what doesn't it like? Print our sort. It should work. We'll look at sort. This thing is distracting. Oh, maybe I did. Yes, I did. Good catch. There. So that's our original and our sorted. And we can do a reverse sort, which does it in reverse order. Okay, so our sort is reverse, sort is regular, but there's just a ton of these. So, I mean, I kind of listed the more popular ones, but you can kind of take a look. And so we've got indexed arrays, array functions, but there's also associative array functions that will do pretty much the same thing. So a sort is for an associative array sort. Okay, AR sort does it in reverse. You can search for a value and get the key, which is actually kind of useful, right? Because it's not an indexed one. So you may know the value, but you might not know what key accesses it. So this will let you find out what the key is. Okay? And if you want to know how many items are in the array, there is a function that does that as well. Okay, so all sorts of different functions that you can use. I am going to have you guys, I believe, add to the arrays that you're going to be creating using a function, just so you can, practice a little bit. So, assignment. Oops, let me stop this.